Okay, well, welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. I just wanted to make sure it's starting to work, and I hope you're having a great day wherever you are. If you're in England, you might be blessed with some gorgeous sunshine. And I'm going to be introducing to you shortly with our special guest today. We've got Tim Spiker. Tim's going to be joining me for a LinkedIn Live. We're going to be chatting for the next 45 minutes to an hour. Tim is a leadership advisor, and he's also the author of The Only Leaders Worth Following. Definitely check that out on Amazon as well. Tim basically is a speaker, author, and he's a leadership consultant. He works with organizations right around the world, helping them basically create better leaders. Just before we bring Tim on, I just want to thank you all for joining. If you want a copy of this at the end, we'll be creating it for you, and you can just let us know, and we'll put it in a blog, and you can watch the video at your leisure. This is an interactive session, so it's a chance for you to add your comments, add your questions, anything you want to say along the way. We're trying to answer those questions. And without further ado, I'm going to bring Tim in. I'm just going to check that everything's working okay. If anyone wants to jump on and say they've got any sound problems or any issues they can't hear, I'll be super grateful. And I will bring Tim in. Tim. Hey, good morning, Tim.
Good. I guess good afternoon to you. Good morning to me. It's good to be with you and the group here, coming to you live from the most politically stable place on the planet. I just want to mention that.
Fantastic. Well, look, we had a little political chat yesterday offline, and it's all good, friendly banter. And anyway, whatever the case, we wish everything well for the year ahead.
Thank you. Yes.
And look, thanks for joining us, first of all. Obviously, this is a challenging time with many individuals, many companies, many businesses. We talked a little bit about that yesterday, but perhaps first, can I just, why don't you just give us a quick introduction, Tim, what you've been doing, and then we'll jump into some of these things that we're going to be talking about today.
Well, for me, the story in this work started about 20 years ago. I was waiting tables here in St. Louis, Missouri, which is pretty much here in the center of the U.S. And one of my fellow wait staff invited me to an open house for a marketing company. And I was going to study marketing in grad school. I was pretty sure there was going to be a free meal, and that was very attractive to me at the time. And so I went, and I took a seat in the center of the room. And that turned out to be a very important decision, even though I didn't know it at the time, because about 3 minutes in, I realized what an open house for a marketing company is. And it was actually a recruiting meeting for a multi-level marketing organization. And I don't have any problem with MLMs, but I didn't have any interest in selling water purifiers to my family and friends. And so my plan was, I was thinking, what do I do? Do I get out of here? And I'd taken that seat in the middle of the room. So I was gonna have to make a scene to get out. And so I decided to stay. And they started talking about, what does it mean to be an employee? And it's, getting me to that meeting that night, I say it's the best lie I've ever been told. Because as I sat there, that question just landed on me that night. And I just thought, all these people are saying such negative things about what it means to be an employee, but that doesn't have to be that way. If we led more effectively, the answer of what's it like to follow David? It's incredible. You can't believe the things we're achieving. I can't believe how I'm growing personally. I can't believe how even my family is cared for through this. Why couldn't that be the answer? And so that's happened to me 20 years ago. I did leave at the break. I grabbed my sandwich. I got out of there, but I just started interviewing every leader who I had access to. That led from one thing to the next. Eventually, I'm in leadership consulting and getting a chance to be involved in the research we're going to talk about. So that's how I got started in all of this.
Fantastic. And look, obviously, if we take us back to January last year, pre-pandemic, there's challenges already in leading teams, leading people. But obviously, that went magnified 100 times, 1,000 times for people, juggling their business, juggling their family life, their children, their partners, etc., etc. So difficult, whilst also trying to engage with their teams and their people. What have you noticed that people have been sharing with you, and perhaps what are some of the things, the actionable takeaways that people can use to be a better leader?
Yeah, of course, one of the biggest challenges during this time has actually been relational connection, because we're on these, very exactly what we're doing here today. We're connecting electronically, but it's very different than walking around the office and bumping into people. And so that informal check-in, that informal connection has to become more intentional for folks. And so this idea, if the connection that we have to our followers is important, how do we do that in the midst of a world that is extremely virtual? And one of my clients, some of leadership, frankly, is not rocket science, if I could just say that. I mean, I'd like to present to everybody that I'm a rocket science genius, but I'm not. Some of this is just very practical things. And so if we're not going to have time in the office together because of the pandemic, what does that mean? That means we can't just forget that time. People are still out there, and especially in this season, they're out there, and many of them are hurting in ways that are new because of how we're having to handle things. And so one of the clients I have just said, "Hey, we're gonna meet up periodically, and by the way, we're gonna spend a half an hour, and there's no agenda regarding work. I just want to check in to see how you are." And I know for many people that might be like super type A drivers, what does that have to do with the business? I get that question. I'm an engineer by education, so I can relate to that question. And the answer is we need the full engagement of people. And people fully engage with people who give a crap about them. and so ultimately, yeah, in that half an hour, you may not be advancing the project or the cause of the organization in some way in that very narrow slice. But when people know you are with them, they bring a whole lot more of their discretionary effort. And so we need to do it genuinely. I'm not talking about pretend like you care. Let's really tap into that. But creating some time just for the human connection that would normally happen. I know it's different, but let's not forget about that just because it's tougher.
Tell us a little bit about what you mean by inwardly sound and others focused. Let's dive into that.
Okay, great. You've said the magic words, David. That's great. So the research, I referenced it earlier. Let's talk about it a little bit. I was working with a consulting firm, and we were bringing our clients up to the west side of Pikes Peak in Colorado here in the U.S., and we would put them through a series of leadership exercises. And as a part of that, we had 3 assessments: a personality assessment, a natural ability assessment, and a leadership 360. And we were regularly getting questions: what's the connection? Is there a magic mix? If I have this personality type and that natural ability, do I have a better chance of being a more effective leader? Or how do I find those people? And so we had enough data to run the numbers. So my colleague, Vanessa Kiley, she was our resident number cruncher, and she went in and she looked for correlations. And here's what she found. Absolutely nothing. She found no correlation between personality, natural ability, and leadership effectiveness. And I remember as I turned to walk out of her office that night, she said, but I did find something else that we weren't looking for. And so I'm like, okay, like, what is it? And on our leadership 360, we had 8 different aspects of leadership that we were measuring. So just imagine a pizza that's equally divided into 8 slices. What she found is that just 2 of those slices were driving almost 70% of the variability on our leadership assessment. Years later, we had 10 times the data points. She reran the assessment, and that movement, that variability on just those 2 areas went up to 77%. And so we knew we had something very unique. Some things aren't always obvious in the moment. About 3 years later, it kind of finally came into focus for me as I was sitting in my office one day, not doing what I was probably supposed to be doing. And that's when kind of the bell went off. I looked at those 2 areas, and I realized they were different than the other 6, not just from the data, but in what they were about. And that's when the light bulb went off, that those 2 aspects that were driving over 3/4 of the results on that assessment, those 2 were about who you are as a human being. And the other 6 were about what you do. And that's when this idea is like, oh my goodness, here's what this data says. This data says that 3/4 of my effectiveness as a leader comes from who I am, not what I do. And those 2 pieces of who are the 2 things that you just said: inwardly sound and others focused. That's 3/4 of leadership.
That's fantastic, and I love that. I love the background on that and how you came to it, even after 3 years of realization.
We just took 30 seconds. We fast forwarded everybody so nobody had to spend that 3 years like we did. So good.
Well, tell us a little bit about that. What outly focused? How can that be practical in the workplace, and how can that be? How can leaders or future leaders, potential leaders, consistently display those attributes?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just say this is hard. And we should expect it to be, because great leaders don't grow on trees. And how many times has anything of value in life been easy? So I want to start out with realistic expectation setting here, is that it's hard work to become and stay an exceptional leader. So again, nothing rocket science about that, but let's just put it on the table. When we talk about being others focused, let's just think about that in the broadest sense. I'll share some more specifics here. But what it means is, as a leader, this whole exercise that we're involved in, it's not just about me. It's not just about my ego. It's not just about my bank account. It's not just about my upward mobility. It's I have an understanding that I am interested in and paying attention to the other people around me, the people that I'm leading. What does that look like practically? Let me read off a few of these things. We talk about being attentive, curious, empathic, humble, a Greek word called agapone, and finally, emotionally mature. And I'll just key in on one of those that we work with our clients around a lot, which is the idea, what does it mean to be a curious leader? You can read a bevy of articles about intellectual curiosity and how important it is in order to be in and a part of the C-suite. Those exist all over the place. What we're lacking, and what really brings it home, is a curiosity about people, curiosity about their ideas, their interests, their perspectives, ultimately. Many times we'll see leaders who have tons of intellectual curiosity, but they're not really interested in other people. And so their relationships are thinner, and the information that they get from those around them is also thinner. And so all of that makes for a less efficient organization. So we talk about some very simple ways in order for people to practice being more curious. And I'll tell you what our goal is based on the research. Mm-hmm. Our goal is not to merely teach leaders a set of skills. Skills are good. Skills are important. But putting all the cards on the table, we're working with leaders about who they are as human beings. Because at the end of engaging with them, what we hope to do is actually move the needle for them to be a more curious human being, knowing that that's going to have an impact on their leadership. And so that's a little deeper work than, let me just teach you a few questions.
Who out there in the world, perhaps a famous person, it's someone that we would all know, who displays those qualities that well, and why do you think they're successful at it?
Wow, who displays? So we're thinking about here's one of the challenges with that question. Everybody has meaningful flaws. Everybody, none of us is perfect. These are the highest of standards that we're talking about. And so in that, any single person that I might choose from history is going to have some things that we could poke at and say, yeah, they were good here, but they weren't so good there. And instead of picking a person, what I'd like to do is pick an organization. If I could twist it just a little bit. Yeah. Here in the U.S., we have an airline called Southwest Airlines. And the Southwest Airlines story is fairly famous because what they put at the heart of their organization and of their leadership development is this idea of being others focused, that the leaders in the organization exist to serve. And it's built into everything that they do. And what's fascinating about Southwest Airlines, if somebody wants to say, okay, well, that sounds nice, but tell me about the bottom line. What about the dollars, Tim? Well, they're arguably the best performing airline in the history of airlines. They, even back when 9/11 happened, to go back to that point, they still were profitable. And it wasn't because of something they did that day. It was because of a culture that they had built and how that created even some strategic latitude with how they negotiated contracts. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way. They had relationships already in place where they could make proper adjustments, where they even were profitable in that crazy time. The airline industry is famous for bankruptcy. I mean, it is almost like, just let us. What year are you going to be bankrupt? And we know you'll survive and get out of it. Never for Southwest Airlines. So they have a unique business model for sure, but the business model wouldn't be enough if they didn't have this culture behind it that caused people to bring that discretionary effort. So I think that, and here's another reason why Southwest is such an important story. Herb Kelleher was kind of the founder there, the most famous founder. But when you look at the other leaders at the top of the organization that have come after him, they have continued. There's legacy there of not just this idea of others focus, but of performance. And so it's a way better story than just the Herb Kelleher story.
Now, I love that story, but let me just give you a real world on the ground question about that. Sure. Because there's going to be clearly, people are moving around other organizations. There might be people, no disrespect to Delta or American, but I'll just use those as an example.
That's fine.
That will be coming from those organizations and moving to Southwest. Mm-hmm. So there's a different culture and a different way, as you quite quietly said. How if you're moving to that organization, or you're trying to create that outwardly focused culture, mm-hmm. How do people do that in organizations when they're moving around different companies?
Well, I mean, ultimately, driving culture is a responsibility of leadership. And so one of the things that Southwest is famous for is being very picky about who they bring in the organization. So certainly there's a barrier in the interviewing process. They're trying to head that off before. But here's the thing. They don't exclusively rely on that. The development of the culture and the development of leaders who have an others-focused mentality is an ongoing reality at Southwest Airlines. They didn't say it one time and say, okay, we've checked that box. They're investing time, energy, and money over and over and over again, so that once people come into the organization, that these messages and ideas get reiterated and equipped over and over and over again. So they have a barrier. Now, if you're the person that's trying to get through the barrier because you want to be there, then you may have some work to do. You may have some adjustment to do in your perspective if you want to be a part of a culture like that.
Now, before we move on to trust and performance and the correlation with that, I know many people who are on this LinkedIn that are on here, and people I've spoken to over the last 12 to 18 months, particularly during this time, have said that getting time with senior management, with their senior leadership, can be incredibly difficult. Mm-hmm. And for those leaders, they're incredibly busy juggling multiple things. How have you seen that shaping up, and what can leaders do to ensure that they create that time and it's spent well with the right people at the right time?
Yeah. Well, part of it is just a matter of perspective and commitment, honestly. I want to let everybody in on something. You know how you think, like, I am the most unbelievable busiest leader on planet Earth? Here's the story. Everybody thinks that. and that doesn't mean you're not busy. But I do want you to know what you probably intuitively know is that all the leaders are busy. And so it's always a competition for time and attention. And ultimately, if I don't know another way to put this, so I'll just put it in a rather, and I don't mean this offensively, but if it applies, it applies. And that's this. If you don't have time to engage with the people you're leading, you don't have time to lead effectively. I mean, and so are there enough hours in the day for any of us? No, there's not enough hours in the day. But if we don't prioritize engagement with the people that we're leading, then we're going to have a less than optimal outcome. Let me give you an example, because so many times we want to talk about strategy. And by the way, I'm not anti-strategy. I love a great strategy. But I also know that just like everything else in leadership, strategies can be imperfect. And one of the exercises that I do with our clients when we're getting started is I'll put two people in the same spot on the opposite side of the room. And one person has a very short path to get to our destination, and the other one has a very long path. And the long path represents an inefficient strategy, a strategy that's not as good. but then we talk about different energy levels in the people that are racing. Because the answer is who's going to get there first? And unfortunately, that answer is it depends. It depends on how much energy is coming from the person that's traveling. And so the example for the person who has the long route, we're like, you get to take 10 steps for every 1 step this person takes. Now, who's going to win to the destination? This strategy is not perfectly efficient, but I have a more engaged workforce. I have people that are bringing more of that extra energy. And in the end, they win the race. And so what do we really want? We really want both, understandably. We want a great strategy and we want fully engaged people. But ultimately, sometimes when our people are fully engaged, they can make a less than perfect strategy work. So that all just gets back to we have to take time to engage with our people, because ultimately, I mean, let's be honest, as executives, what do? I mean, we're not putting anything together in terms of especially if you're in a larger organization. Other people are putting our products together. Other people are interacting with our clients. They're at the front lines. Our job is to help them be exceptional at that. And so we have to prioritize time for them so that that energy level is high. So even if our strategy is not perfect, and it probably isn't, even if our strategy isn't perfect, we're still going to get to that destination more quickly.
Tim, I'm just going to bring in the comment from Maggie there up on the screen. Thanks, Maggie. She said, does who you are not drive what you do? Thanks, Maggie, for that.
Yeah, it absolutely can and does have a relationship between that. And I'll share a little connection point so we can see. We've been talking about strategy, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about because it's the sexy thing that everybody wants to talk about in leadership. Strategy. My people aren't strategic enough. How do I help them be more strategic? Here's the connection between who and what that gets at what you're getting at there, Maggie. Let's talk about, we're going to get a group of people into the room to make some decisions strategically about where we're headed for the next couple of years. And if I am and let me just pull out some less than positive leadership qualities. If I am proud and not humble, if I am insecure as opposed to being secure, if I am not curious as opposed to being curious, let's think about who ends up in that conversation. Let's go to insecurity. Many of us have had the very unpleasant experience of following an insecure leader. What does that feel like? It's usually pretty painful. The insecure leader doesn't want anybody else in the room who is as smart as him or her. They're threatened by other talented people often. They're not sure that this is their place. And I've literally seen very capable people extracted from the strategic conversation because one of the leaders was insecure. They were threatened by somebody. I've seen that happen. And so what we want is secure leaders who are comfortable in their own skin, humble enough to listen to other people's ideas. Because what we want, we want a group of ideas so that we can get to the best idea. But if I don't listen to other people, if I can't learn from anybody else, if I don't have enough humility, at least for that, then we're not going to have the best ideas we're working from. And there's a similar story with curiosity. If I don't dig into the ideas of other people, our options for strategy are going to be limited before we even get started. So to Maggie's point that's embedded in that question, doesn't who you are have an impact on what you do? Absolutely. Because the secure, humble, curious leader, because of those connections, that organization is going to end up with a more effective strategy than a leader who doesn't have those things. So who absolutely affects what?
Tim, tell us a little bit about trust, how trust builds engagement, and obviously how that impacts and builds performance. You got a story there?
Well, I have a story. Hey, I got an idea. If you're up for it, you want to do a little exercise here?
Oh, God. Go on, then.
Come on, Dave. We can do this. Because this is a connection point here that's really important and doesn't get talked about enough. And I think this is going to be the best way to do it. So here's what we're going to do. I want you, David, to think of the name of somebody that you really, really do not trust. Okay? So you've got that name in mind. Hopefully it's not Tim Spiker. But so you got somebody in mind?
Yes.
Okay. Now this is a visualization exercise, and by the way, everybody who's with us here, I encourage you to do this. So you think of that person that you really, really don't trust. Again, hopefully it's not somebody you're watching the session with here. All right. So the way this works is I'm going to read you an email from this person that you really, really do not trust. But what I need you to do is really imagine viscerally what it would feel like to receive this email. So this isn't really an intellectual exercise. This is an emotional exercise, okay? So I want you to think about where you normally get your email, whether it's on your device or sitting on a computer, and that ding or that notification comes in, and here's what that email says, okay? So you ready? Put yourself in that place. Here's what the email says. I'm going to read it. The subject line says, "You have been chosen." All right? So I have chosen you to take on some new responsibilities. They won't be easy, but I think they are a real fit with your skills. This will be a big help to our team, and I'm confident that this will advance your career. In the end, even though this will be difficult, you're really going to benefit from this, I promise. Okay. So now, scale of 0 to 10. 10 being you're coming out of your skin excited. 0 is I'm deleting this email right now. I want you to think about, now don't say it out loud, but I want you to think about where your number is. So you got that locked in?
Yep.
Okay. Now we're going to do a different visualization. And this time I want you to think about somebody that you really, really do trust. So we're going to the opposite end of the spectrum. All right? You got that person in mind?
Have indeed.
Okay, now I'm going to read to you another email, and the exercise is the same. I want you to really engage with the activity such that you feel what it would feel like to receive the email I'm going to read from the person that you really, really do trust. Okay? So here we go. I'm going to read this email from the person that you really, really do trust. Here it is. The subject line is, "You have been chosen." I have chosen you to take on some new responsibilities. They won't be easy, but I think they are a real fit with your skills. This will be a big help to our team, and I'm confident that this will advance your career. In the end, even though this will be difficult, you're really going to benefit from this, I promise. Now, same scale. 0, I'm just deleting this. 10, coming out of my skin excited. You have a number this second time. Okay, so you got your 2 numbers. David, was your number bigger the second time than the first time?
Very slightly.
So tell us about the 2 numbers that, second number was the person that you really, really trust. The first number is the person that you really, really don't trust. So what were your 2 numbers?
They were 0 and 10.
Okay. All right. So this, I mean, and this is the answer. Now, you've gone to 0. So the difference, I can't even calculate a percentage because it's infinite, right? But let's say that you had chosen 1, and I probably need to change the exercise so you can't pick 0. Yeah. Let's say if you had gone from 1 to 10, we have to understand what that's a 900% improvement in engagement based on one thing. What's the one thing we changed? The trustworthiness of the person delivering the message. I do this exercise over and over again with executive teams, and it has never been below 200%. And so I want us to think about that a little bit. 200% improvement in engagement based on the trustworthiness of the person delivering the message. So here's why this connects into performance. You ask about trust. If I'm inwardly sound and others focused, so let's come back to those 2 ideas. When I am those 2 things, I am more trustworthy. When I am, inwardly sound, when I am a stable, sane, you can count on me, I'm a port in a storm, I don't get easily shaken, I'm clear about who I am. Those are all the things in inwardly sound. Others focused, we've already talked about. I'm not showing up here today just for my betterment and my bank account. I'm here for you. Those 2 things cause me to be more trustworthy. We do this exercise, and this is the thing that doesn't get talked about enough. The link between being trustworthy and engagement is absolutely crucial and significant. And there are 300 studies worldwide that show the connection between engagement and results. And so what we have to do as leaders, if we want great results, is we have to, very specific language here, we have to become more trustworthy. I'm not against team building. Go play ping pong and have a few pints together. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. That's building trust. What we work with people and what we encourage leaders to do is become more trustworthy, because that creates greater engagement and that creates better results. And you're 0 to 10. You're at the. Not everybody has such a wide impact, but there's a huge connection between trust and engagement.
You don't know who I was thinking about, Tim. But no, actually, all seriousness, that trustworthy is around about honor, because you're very honored. But what's interesting about that, and just touching on the trust thing, is about displaying those consistent qualities of building trust over a sustained period of time, I imagine.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's never I don't show up one day, I'm curious, and the rest, this isn't a box I check one day and say, well, I've been attentive enough. That's enough. I don't need to worry about being attentive, or, you know what, that's too much humility. I can't, no more humility. Yeah, no, it is very much about consistently being inwardly sound and others focused. It's not a one-time event.
Tell us a little bit about why 77%, if that stat is correct, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you got it correct. Yeah. So ultimately, so that gets back to the story of the research, where that variability was happening. So as we looked at some of those other areas of leadership, and they were in the more traditional space. So by that, I mean motivation, strategy, execution, resource allocation, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, there's an analogy here to understand it, because we talk about the who, not what principle. But in fact, when we say not what, we don't mean to imply that the what of leadership doesn't matter, because it does. We're talking about what's foundational. And so here's an analogy to kind of bring it all together, I think, and is that of a really big, strong tree. When I drive past, if I'm going down the highway and there's this beautiful tree in the median, let me tell you what I don't say. I don't say, wow, I bet there's some awesome roots under there. Like, it's not in us to think about the things that we don't readily and easily see. And yet, when we see that big, beautiful, strong tree, what is true? What's true is that there's an incredible network under the ground that we can't see that is feeding that tree. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about in how this research plays out. Underneath the ground is the who of leadership, the inwardly sound and others focused that we're talking about. Above the ground are all these great things that we see around strategy and motivation. But the truth is, if we were to sneak underground, cut off all the roots, and not change anything above the ground, that tree would die. There would be nothing to look at. And so the reason that we see that 77% is that, yes, photosynthesis and the like is happening up here, but without a strong root system, none of that works. And so ultimately, we have to work on what's driving 77% that's coming up from the ground. Do we work up here as well in the what of leadership? Absolutely. But the problem is that most leadership development is happening at about 98% above ground, maybe 99. We're not investing time and energy. And frankly, I think sometimes we don't have the courage to have a conversation about who. And so this ratio, 77% that came out of the research, is simply saying, this isn't, again, not super complicated. The roots of the tree matter. Without the roots, very little of anything good happens. And so that's why that percentage is so much bigger ultimately. And I'll get back to the story I was sharing earlier. Just as we play out the idea of strategy, how does curiosity and humility and a personal sense of security, how does that play into something like strategy? That's why we think of this analogy from the roots up through the tree, 77% coming from the roots.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And of course, I'm sure it's become more challenging during this lockdown, much more harder for organizations, because they've got, they're fighting so many different fires. Leaderships are fighting many fires. What are some of the quick wins and things that people can do to ensure that they're building the right foundations in the organization, even if they don't perhaps have that further leadership support on some of those ideas?
Yeah. Well, one of those things, and we alluded to it roughly to earlier in terms of being with your people, and a key to that is the word empathy. And if you notice what Harvard Business Review has actually been talking about empathy a whole lot more over the last 5 years or so. It's not just a pandemic thing. They have started to talk about it more. But I want to point out something. And HBR is obviously they're an incredible source of information. But most of what comes out of that type of publication stops just short. And what I mean by that is they'll talk about the skills of empathy significantly, but it's like we're afraid to go the next step and say it's about who you are. And I believe that there are skills involved in empathy, but I think we all understand if I only go through the motions and I'm checking boxes of things related to empathy, like asking a probing question and waiting for the answer, and then imagining how if my heart isn't in it to be with that person, that empathy is going to ring hollow. And so ultimately we have to be willing to talk about the person. We have to be willing to engage with people about what's really going on within them in terms of, are you actually being empathic? Or are you just trying to check the boxes? So in the midst of pandemic, as we're dealing with so much more virtual, that intentionality around empathy, by the way, you're leading people, many of them, depending on where you land in the organization, the people that are reporting to you, for most of us, are in a little different financial situation than we are, especially if you're sitting near the top of the organization. And just a pause. I mean, I know this sounds so simple, but just a pause for 2 minutes and think about the person who's working for you that's got 4 kids and makes half the amount of money that you make. So what does this time feel like to them? What are the threats to them? If maybe for you, you're like, hey, if my job went away tomorrow, I wouldn't be excited about that, but I've got enough money in the bank for the next year or two. Some of you are very blessed to be in that situation. There are many people in our organizations that couldn't even imagine completing a sentence like that. So we've got to keep in mind other people's situations. Now, we've got to drive for results. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden we get soft on results. In fact, people don't even want that, frankly. They still want to strive and move forward. So empathy, even in the midst of this pandemic, is really important. One other one that we see is really important is being flexible. And, that's a quality, again, we can see a connection between humility and flexibility. The old, we don't want to throw, good money after bad. We have to be willing to say that, hey, things are different now than when we originally made these plans. And I realize that's patently obvious, but some people have a real hard time being flexible with where they're taking their departments and their organization. And so that's another piece that kind of wells up from who you are, is that we have to have an exceptional amount of flexibility in these days that wasn't required of us when we weren't in this context.
How do you see that shifting? I mean, obviously, post-pandemic, there's going to be a lot more people working from home.
Yeah.
There's going to be people coming back to the office, but it's definitely going to shift the ways of working. How do you see, again, still those challenges for, senior leaders to ensure that they're giving time to both those people at home, but also those people that they can see face to face, that's fair and equal?
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with you. There's going to be a shift. I don't think that we're going to end up in a spot where nobody's at the office anymore. I think that would be where we've been, and that's a bit extreme, but more flexible work arrangements. Maybe we're in the office periodically as opposed to all the time. Companies are going to be seeing ways to save money through that even as well. And we've heard from both sides. We've heard companies say our business models change forever, and there's other companies said as soon as we can get back, we're going back. And so ultimately, each company is going to have some strategic decisions to make. But your point is a good one, David, which is to say, especially if you end up in a hybrid model where you weren't before. The pandemic opened up some possibilities that we hadn't considered. And now we've got a lot of people saying, hey, I want to work from home. It is going to require us to intentionally engage in a way. Back to this, we're not going to bump into each other in the hallway thing. We're going to have to make we're going to have some discipline around this type of virtual engagement that includes the human side. And we just won't be able to just like, hey, the meeting starts now, it ends precisely at the top of the hour, and we have no interaction other than the business side. We have to be very careful about that because we need to have a more significant connection with our people than what that would allow. So we will have to learn to operate in that hybrid network for those companies that end up in that way if we're going to be effective.
It's a really good point. And over the last few months, I've spoken to other companies and leaders who have adapted successfully, where they've had those sort of virtual corridor bumps, where even the CEO of those companies have said, look, I want random people to talk to random people in the organization who I might just naturally bump into in the corridor.
Yes.
And that's great to hear that some of those organizations are embracing that.
Yeah, we have to get over the fact that it feels a little awkward to do it intentionally. And the way that we can do that is we can express the motive behind it. I don't want to be disconnected from the organization. This would have happened naturally, but now we have to be intentional. And here's the story. I'm going to be intentional about it. I'm going to do it. I'm not just going to let it slip away. And there's a great message in that. That says that this matters enough that we're going to make it happen, even if we have to be really intentional about it.
Tim, I want to finish off, and thanks so much so far. I just want to touch on values and how values are becoming more important for leading teams. What have you been seeing out there, and what could you share with our audience?
Well, I think that when we go through trying times, that things like values always kind of rise to the surface as becoming more important. But I would contend this. I would say that they've always been important. It's just that some moments like this highlight them more. People in general want to, and sometimes they don't say it out loud, and frankly, sometimes they're even not aware of it themselves. But I think if you look over the course of humanity, you see a trend with people wanting to be engaged with something that's bigger and more meaningful than just themselves. And values is a way to tap into that. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way. I mean, that's true for us as leaders as well. I want to come here and invest in something that makes a difference, but I want to do it in a way that's making a difference even for the people within the organization that are producing the goods and services that are going out. So for me, in my view, what's going on here with the pandemic isn't causing values to be more important than they were previously, but I do think it's shining a light on it in a way. And the trick will be for us, if it's shown a light on values in our organization, is that hopefully vaccines kick in, herd immunity kicks in, we get back to some semblance of normalcy. I think the really great leaders in organizations will not let the values just kind of be quiet and in the closet after that they'll continue to see the value in those. And that'll be the discipline that we as leaders need to bring to the values conversation when that happens.
Tim, thank you so much. I don't think we've got any more questions today. And actually, you spoke, there was so much great content there, so many great things. Thanks for putting me on the spot there a little bit. I really enjoyed that, and it made such a big difference. And I'm going to take that away actually.
Thanks for being game. I appreciate it.
Hey, no, I appreciate it. And look, if anyone's interested in finding out more about you, connecting with you, you can they can jump onto your LinkedIn profile. Just
Sure.
Head to Tim Spiker. Just put a connection request and say you enjoyed perhaps his LinkedIn Live. You can check out his book, The Only Leaders Worth Following, over on Amazon, I think. And if you want to connect with Tim, he can talk to you and help you, coach you individually or as part of your organization. Good luck enjoy the weekend over in Atlanta. Has the sun come out now this morning? Has it just come up?
It's getting there. It's getting there. It's not quite there yet. So we'll get there soon. David, if I could just add in one thing. If somebody reaches out via LinkedIn, just let me know that you saw this through Vine Resources. And one of the things that we want to, this is a great opportunity for us too, because I'm passionate about this message. If I was independently wealthy, there's very little I would change about what I do because I love this work. And related to that, if you just mention that this is where you ran into it, whether it's through the live or recording, we're happy to do a free hour of consultation to think through some of these things for your organization and for you. That's something that we can give. So just mention Vine when you reach out, and that's something that we're happy to offer people who catch us here.
Tim, that's very kind of you. And we'll put something on the blog when we send it out to everyone, and we'll put a link for it, and they can reach out for you for that. So it's very kind of you. Perfect. Hold on the line a second, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you very much. Well, look, I hope you enjoyed that LinkedIn Live. We'll be sending this out so people can connect with this. So look out for this on your email or on a message on LinkedIn. We've got some fabulous guests coming up over the next couple of months. We're going to be pushing out some of these LinkedIn Lives. Got some fantastic speakers coming on, some performance coaches, and some really interesting people who have excelled in life that might just give you some actionable takeaways that you can use. Stay safe if you're homeschooling like we are. Keep doing it. We might be here for a bit longer. I know it's clear my wife, but enjoy the quality time that you get with your children, even if they're driving you up the wall. We'll speak soon, and thanks very much.